Welcome to 805 Focus. I'm Dr. Cinder Sinclair with Nonprofit Connect, and we will be bringing you the latest on your favorite nonprofits. So get ready to be inspired. Our special guest today is Marsha Bailey, and Marsha is the founder of the wildly successful Women's Economic Ventures. Welcome, Marsha.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. You have so many fascinating stories to tell. So you founded Women's Economic Ventures, otherwise known as WEAVE, and then you provided 30 years of excellent leadership, and I would venture to say that Marsha Bailey is one of the most beloved executive directors in Santa Barbara. And so I'm just thrilled that you're here, looking forward to hearing the story about what inspired you to start WEAVE.
Well, thank you. Very nice introduction. Like a lot of things, people who start businesses or nonprofits, we often have challenges in our own lives. Mm-hmm. And we think, if I'm experiencing this, other people must be too. And for me, I found it very challenging to make enough money to take care of myself. And here I was, I'm white, middle class, college educated. I thought, gosh, if it's hard for me, how hard must it be for a single mom, somebody who didn't have some of my advantages. And when I got out of grad school, I started working for the Rape Crisis Center, and we worked very closely with domestic violence solutions. And I saw women stay in unsafe, abusive kinds of environments because they didn't have the economic wherewithal to leave. Yeah. And so it was kind of all of those things. It was there was a lot of information coming out in the press at that time in the 80s. This was about how women's earnings compared to men's not favorably. Sure. I think women were earning about 60 cents to the male dollar at that time, and if you're a woman of color, it was worse and worse. So it was really a combination of all of those things. Mm-hmm.
And so you decided, I'm going to do something about that.
Yeah, I'd been working in the nonprofit sector, loved working with women, had studied the feminist movement in graduate school, and it just really spoke to me. And I started volunteering for what was then the Women's Community Building Project, and we eventually became Women's Economic Ventures. Mm.
And so, if I remember, you really wanted to help. You said, I think I heard you say one time, that women feel uncomfortable around money sometimes, and they especially are nervous with math.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, it's probably not as true anymore, but when we grew up, you were not supposed to talk about sex, politics, or money.
Yeah.
Well, we all talk about sex and politics, but a lot of people still don't talk about money, and that includes your parents. And so, I never knew how much my father earned. I had no idea if we were fabulously wealthy or, near, having the house repossessed. So, I think you do a disservice to your children when you're not very open about money. And so, a lot of women didn't really think about, well, how much can I earn? How much do I need to earn? And then when it came to planning for the future, it was the same. I remember I was just appalled one time after we started up, and somebody called me and wanted to do a seminar for us on investment dressing. And I said, we all know that if I buy a blazer, it is not going to appreciate in value. And so it's like, that was really upsetting to me, but that was the kind of thing that women were taught, like, invest in yourself. That meant make yourself look good, wear nice clothes, so you will attract some nice, mostly man, you were going to some person who's going to come and take care of you, and then you won't have to take care of yourself. And then you get in these situations where you can't be self-sufficient. You're very vulnerable. And we got those messages all the time. In terms of the math anxiety, we would have women come to our classes, and that would be the one thing they were really worried about was business finance, which is really, it's arithmetic. It's not, algebra 2 or geometry or anything. It's arithmetic. And so they would have this fear of looking at that, and that's the most important data you're going to get in a business. And then they wouldn't show up on the day that we had, it was like they were so worried about it that they totally avoided it.
Yeah.
And what I found for myself when, as a nonprofit leader, you're doing budgets, you're looking at financial statements, balance sheets, it was really empowering, very powerful to learn about money and to learn about how money works in the economy and how we make political decisions based on, economic interests. And so I think that, just beyond managing our money, the knowledge of how economics works and how our value system impacts the economic decisions that our government makes are just really, really important.
Yeah, and so now, fast forward 30 some years, Weave has helped so many women learn all these things, learn how to be a successful business person, start businesses, run organizations, and all of that. It's just
I'm so
incredible.
Proud of that. I when I walk down the street and pass a business that I know was a Weave client, they either got a loan from Weave or took a class from Weave or whatever. It just makes me feel really good that we were able to help somebody realize a long-term dream and goal that they had.
Yeah. And it's still going strong.
It is. It's still going strong under Kathy Odell's leadership. Many people know Kathy very well. She's been involved in many important startups in Santa Barbara area. And I have to say, frankly, that was one of the things that made it easy for me to retire, was knowing that Kathy was going to take my place.
Gosh. Yeah. So after 30 years, you said, I think it's time to retire, for me to retire.
Yeah.
And so I think people would be interested in knowing, how did you know that it was time to retire? And then you made that decision, and then you gave your board 3 years notice. And so what was all that like, from a board member standpoint, from your standpoint, to go through that succession process?
Well, being the founder of the organization, I knew that a lot of people really identified me with the organization. And so I wanted to give the board plenty of time to find a replacement. And at the time, we really didn't have anybody on staff who was ready to step into that role. And Kathy was on our board, and thankfully she was at a place in her life where she really wanted to do something that was fulfilling for her, that kind of where she felt like she could give back too. And so there was that. Frankly, this is kind of the pettiest part of why I was ready to retire. But somebody would ask me a question, and it's like, oh my God, if I have to answer that question one more time, it was just like, why do women need help, need more help, or kind of whatever. It would be just something that I felt like I'd answered a million times. But the other thing is, I had all these years of loving my work, loving to get up every day and go into the office. And what kept it really interesting for me all those years was that I was always learning new things. As an organization grows, you have to grow with it. So your skill set changes, your job description changes. And we had gotten to a point where we had, maybe 25 employees. We had 2 different offices. We were at that kind of at the cusp of needing more sophisticated systems for how we tracked things and kind of more formal policies and procedures around things. Not that we didn't have them, but we needed kind of more of them. It was just getting more complicated. And that was not my strong suit, and it was really not what I wanted to do. And I just realized, the organization needs this skill set now. I don't have it, and frankly, I don't want it. I don't care. I mean, it wasn't a challenge that I looked forward to. And so I just felt like, it's time, and the planets kind of all aligned. And I will say this is the last thing. The other thing that made it easy to retire is that we had an incredibly wonderful donor who left us $3 million.
Oh, gosh.
And she's somebody who had been giving for many years. And for me, knowing that we had that kind of financial backing behind us, it made it much easier to leave, because the last thing I wanted to do was to leave the organization in a place where they were worried about making payroll next month.
So you decided to retire, and you gave your board 3 years notice, which I'm sure they appreciated.
I did, and we've had, and still does have, just an incredible board. And the board members and I did a lot of research into succession planning, because especially with a founder, it's more challenging than somebody who's been there for 3 or 5 years. And so we did a lot of research. I was definitely not looking forward to doing, like a nationwide search. We knew how challenging it could be to bring somebody here because of the cost of living here.
Gosh.
And so when Kathy agreed to take on the role, that kind of solved a lot of problems. She had the skill set. She saw it as kind of a transitional role for herself in the organization. Felt like there were people on staff that could be mentored, so that when she was ready to go, there would be somebody ready to step up. And succession planning, it's really important. It's not just at the top. It's just like throughout your whole organization. And it's hard when you're really small, because you don't have the luxury of having, a whole bunch of people providing backup for different roles. Lots of times you have one person in a very specific role. And so that succession planning can be very challenging, but it's also very important.
So you would recommend that nonprofits, regardless of their size, engage in some form of succession planning.
And long before I was ready to leave, I remember we had a situation where, I had an offsite office, and a fax came in from one of our public, funders, and if somebody hadn't gone into my office to use the fax machine, they wouldn't have seen this particular fax that was asking for a 24-hour response.
Oh, gosh.
And so somebody said, Marsha, we need to kind of know more about kind of where things are. At the time, I was still doing all the grant writing and all the reports on grants and stuff, and so we kind of called it, it's like, what's your plan if you get hit by a bus? So, because those things happen too, unfortunately.
So from the time that you gave your 3-year notice until Kathy came on board, there was probably a transition period for Kathy. How long was that?
So it was an interesting transition, because the first year, she came on in May of the year, and we had planned how we were going to announce it. I actually, she and I met with all our major donors to let them know ahead of time. We had it very clearly planned, like when it went out to the press, when it went out to our donors, when it went out to our staff, things like that. So that was all very carefully orchestrated. Kathy had never run a nonprofit before, and so she knew that it was going to be different than running a for-profit business. You and I have talked about this
Yeah.
many times. And so we had about a couple of months, and then I was going on, this was in 2018, I was going on a long trip with one of my sons and was going to be gone for a month. And so we decided that that was the time to transition the staff reporting to her from reporting to me, because it was getting a little confusing for people. It's like, oh, do I come to you or do I go to Kathy?
Yeah.
So she actually took over the active day-to-day management of the staff after only I think it was three months. And so then we worked together through 2019, and then the pandemic hit. And so pretty much all of that last year, 2020, we were working at home. And so I was working on kind of transferring my historical knowledge, and I did that by basically writing a 200-page kind of work and life and leadership memoir about and then I just never looked back.
Gosh, well, good for you. And the thing I've noticed in your life is this thread that goes through that says, always do what you love. I noticed you were doing that when you were deciding what classes to take in college as you were preparing for your professional life. And then as you chose what organizations to get involved with. And then as you founded Weave, it was that driving force. And now here you are in retirement, and you are actively doing what you love. What is that?
Yeah.
Art. You've always loved art.
Yeah.
And now you've got a ceramics practice. Tell us about that.
So I truly believe that doing what you love to do is really the key to having a successful life. And the way I define success is a satisfying life, a fulfilling life. As an undergraduate, I studied fine art and sociology, two things kind of on different sides of the brain that both really interested me. And then graduate school, it was communications. And people always used to say, oh my gosh, what are you going to do with those degrees? You get all these useless. Well, they weren't useless to me, because the sociology really kind of led to my interest in social justice, or kind of was a result of that and led to more of that. The art, really satisfied the creative side. And, I used to think, business was not creative. Business was just stodgy and boring and, bureaucratic. And when you run an organization, it requires a heck of a lot of creativity all the time. You're kind of, where's the money going to come from? Is it going to be, in our case, where are the donations going to come from, or whatever. And so I found that it really was creative all the time, required a lot of creativity. And I used all of those skills in many ways. I mean, in the, having to write persuasive grant proposals or fundraising letters or whatever. But I always did love the visual arts as well. And so I continued to dabble, and I loved making things. I mean, since I was very young, I was making doll clothes and kind of whatever. And so after I retired, my first kind of big project was to build a little studio in my backyard, where I thought I was going to be painting, frankly. But I knew that the clay studio, Santa Barbara, was going to be opening up, and I'd always loved ceramics in college, and I'd done a little bit of it at adult ed in the early 90s. And so I thought, well, I'm going to take a class, and then I was hooked. It became like my vocation. I would get up every day, and often I was the first one there, 9 o'clock, doors open, Marsha's there, she's got her tools, and I've got my clay, and I just love it. It's, at the clay studio, we talk about the transformative nature of clay, and it truly is. I mean, I think as human beings, we we have an urge to get our hands in things and make things. I think sitting in front of a computer screen all day doesn't give you that kind of satisfaction. Even, you know, when they went to using like CAD drafting programs and graphic design programs, it's like, give me a sketchbook and a pencil. That's what I want. I like the tactile part of it. So yeah, I just love it. And I, you know, I mean, I have a new granddaughter, and so I'm making things for her, puppets and knitting things and sweaters and all kinds of good stuff. So it's very satisfying to me to be able to make things, and I especially like making things that are functional. So, you know, ceramics can be very functional piece of art. You have a bowl, or, you know, I love this idea of you get up in the morning and you choose a beautiful mug to drink your coffee out of, and it's unique and handmade, and it's just kind of part of that unique quality of kind of creating this environment around you that reflects things that are made by humans.
And you actually sell your ceramics.
I do. I mostly have sold at the Clay Studio itself. They do a couple of shows each year. They had Christmas and in the spring around June too. So and that's incredibly affirming. You know, I mean, it's like you make things and they're precious to you, and you know, then you go back and you look and you're going, oh man, that was a year later, and it's like, that is really a bad pot. You know? So, but it's very affirming when people love your work, and it's also, I guess in a way it's a judgment if somebody chooses to buy your work or not. But I've gotten so over that. It's kind of like, you know, when you're in school, and especially when you're in the creative arts and you have teachers looking over your shoulders and you can sense their approval or disapproval, you know, just from the or you know, just kind of the quality of their little there. And it's like, it's so great to be in a position where I make things that please me. Yeah. And if it pleases you too, and you want to buy it, great. And if you don't want to buy it, that's great too, because I like it, and you know, I mean, I'll keep using it myself and enjoy it. Yeah.
Well, I have one of your beautiful pieces sitting right there on my entryway, and it's just such a happy piece. Every time I pass by, I just get happier.
And I love color, you know, so it's like I don't make a lot of brown pots. I like very bright colors.
Yeah, this has orange and blue, and when I'm at farmer's market, I pick out just the right flowers to go in it, although you don't have to have flowers in it at all, because it's so beautiful.
That's the beauty of having a really nice ceramic piece. It can sit there empty and look beautiful on its own. Yeah.
So always do what you love. Do you think you always knew what you loved?
I knew pretty early on, like when I was young, I knew I wanted to study art. I mean, I started really drawing a lot and painting a lot, probably when I was 10.
Really?
And but I thought I was going to be an art teacher, and that's what I went to school for. And but being part of the baby boomers, the people who were just a little earlier than us, got recruited to be teachers, and by the time I got out of school, there were just not teaching jobs available. And so it was kind of back to plan B, and I didn't really have a clue what that was going to be. So that was, you know.
Wow. So you would say to people, anybody, whether they're in nonprofit or it doesn't matter what they're doing, you would say, figure out what it is that you love and make sure you're always doing it. What if they say, well, what do you mean? I don't know what I love.
Well, you know, to me, that's the beauty of having a liberal arts education, and it makes me very sad when I see colleges kind of getting rid of their liberal arts classes, because that's where you find that, you know, I mean, it's by experimenting, taking classes that they look kind of interesting to me, and you know, I think sometimes when you're young, you think, oh, if it's difficult, it must not be worth doing. I mean, I
Yeah.
know I felt like that. It's like, oh, this is easy for me.
Yeah.
Like, I love to read. I could have easily gone to the, publishing, writing, English side of things too. So, we need to realize though that those things that are easy for you, they're not easy for other people.
Yeah,
and so value that. I mean,
Very
if something
good.
comes easily to you and you like spending your time doing that, figure out in more depth where that can go. I think the sad part is too many, I mean, it's kind of crazy when you're in ninth grade and they're starting to give you career education in high school, and often the people giving you advice really are pretty clueless about, kind of telling you much beyond their own experience and kind of what the big obvious things are.
Yeah.
So,
Marsha, what a story you've got.
well,
Thank you so much for coming on our show to tell us all about it. And I can't wait till you have another sale. I can come and buy something beautiful.
Thank you. I'll hold you to that.
And thank you for joining us on 805 Focus, and we'll see you next time.